Hello, welcome to a short video just on a few tools that I found useful while breaking down the TVR Tuscan, getting the body off and all those kind of things. Not the usual tools, not the kind of set of spanners or normal ratchets or screwdrivers or whatever, because they're kind of, I have that as a kind of a given, you know, that those tools are pretty useful when working on cars. But these kind of 5 things I've just found to be additionally useful along the way. So let's start with this one at the back. This is just a slightly more powerful kind of impact gun, still battery powered impact gun, but it's a DeWalt one. Just most of my stuff happens to be DeWalt, no real reason. I just like their kit. I think it goes up to 320 Newton meters of torque, so it's got quite a lot of weight in terms of spinning things off, and it's got me out of trouble quite a few times in terms of bolts that were really stubborn at coming out, even when a breaker bar is providing quite a lot of force on them. Sometimes the extra bit of impact that this gives, the little bit of shake on it, just brings them loose, and I found very little of that couldn't undo. That was very useful, particularly on the suspension components where you've got a lot of access. The only thing that I don't find it's that good at is because it's quite a hefty item, it is quite difficult to get into awkward spaces. So even with some attachments on it, it can be very awkward to get into the spaces. That's why with the suspension, because there's so much access around it, that's where it was particularly useful. And obviously the more kind of attachments you add onto it, the more it loses its kind of impact strength and all that kind of stuff, because the force is being transmitted through other things. But other than that, it's been super useful. I'd recommend anyone having something similar. There's a reason why shops have kind of air tools and things like that. That is really useful for the money, and I don't think it was loads of money either. I don't know how much. Maybe I'll put it on the screen now, what it retails with at the moment. So let's move on. 2 big adjustable spanners. I didn't have any adjustable spanners that were this big before. I had one that I felt was reasonably big, but it was nowhere near the kind of how far these can extend out for. And these were particularly useful for taking things like the big oil lines off, coolant lines, that kind of thing, off the engine, because it can go pretty wide. And why 2 of them? Because quite often you had one nut, stabilizing nut, and one that you turned off, so that you can make sure you do it properly, and that's why there's 2. So I just found these 2 useful, especially for the money. Not a lot of money again. These are just Stanley items, and they were pretty good. Done a really good job. And in this particular case, it doesn't give too much. You know, sometimes with these extendable ones, you can set it to the right position and then it flexes a little bit, and therefore you can spin the thing you're trying to do, or you know, round it. These are pretty good at holding their shape. Okay, another power tool. This one, you'll have seen this on lots of different people's kind of channels and people working on cars. There's lots of different variants of it. This happens to be a Sealy one, but the same design you can find all over the place. It's just a simple left either way kind of powered ratchet, basically, that goes around. Why is it so useful? It's not useful for breaking things off when they're tight, and it's not useful for tightening them correctly, right? So it doesn't do either of those things. What it is very useful for is spinning off and pushing on to the point where you do both of those things, right? To the point where after the point you've broken it off, to get it off easily, and then up to the point where you're going to tighten it properly to a specific torque. Because this doesn't tighten too hard. It's not like an impact gun like that, so you don't need to worry about it. It just stops once it gets to a certain amount, and that's not a high torque. And so it's just really useful for that. And because it's really thin head, it does get in a lot of places as well. So again, well recommended for the money. Again, I'll put the price on that I paid, but really useful tool. When I remember I've got it, that is. Next, I've got a whole set of these, just round, I don't know whether it'll focus from here, but round kind of almost punch things, one piece of metal. Why are they so useful? They're useful for just so many things. I've got much fatter ones and slightly thinner ones, so I've got 5 overall. And what they're particularly useful for, a couple of things. One is when a nut or bolt or whatever has got stuck inside your socket because it's got really tight in there. Putting it into the vise and then getting the hammer and just knocking that nut out, it just comes out in almost one hit. But these are obviously thin enough to get through the back of the socket and make a good impact on the nut inside, so they've been super useful for that. And then also for knocking bolts through, instead of trying to knock directly onto the bolt and inevitably mashing the bolt end a bit too much or hitting something around it or whatever, you just hold that on and knock it with a hammer, and that's been really useful again on some of the suspension bits to push them through kind of larger areas, especially the longer bolts. So these are just surprisingly useful at different times. Recommend a small set of them. Finally, in this set of 5, I've got these. So this says Think Work on the top. Again, cheap set off Amazon basically. But these are bolt extractors. So when you have rounded something off, which I have done previously, these are excellent for being able to put on. So they've got, this is going to focus, but they've got kind of sharp edges in there that dig in around the bolt that you're trying to extract that you've rounded or whatever. And as long as you select the right size, you can hammer them on. That's what I do anyway. I try and hammer them on as much as possible to dig into the bolt, and then turn them, trying to keep it as straight as possible, turn it to extract whatever you're trying to extract off. A really good example of this. Some of you might remember, this was the diff bracket. It had one, I won't be able to find it now because I put it in the bin, but it had one Allen bolt in here, I think it was that one, that was rounded on the inside of the Allen bolt. So I couldn't do anything about the inside, but this extractor, I don't know whether it was this one or this one, I think, went round the outside of the Allen bolt, which is just a completely round surface. No, not even any semblance of it being hexagonal. Just completely round, but this dug into it and enabled me to turn it off relatively easily. I was really impressed. So they don't always work, but they do sometimes get you out of a tricky situation or two. So I would recommend a set of those as well to have hanging around. Finally, this is almost a bonus thing, not one of the 5 really, but just a set of these small microfiber cloths. This was a cheapo set. I think there's a set of, you probably can't see that, but I think I got them in like a pack of 30 or 40. And I treat them as relatively disposable. Once they get too mucky, I throw them away because they won't clean up. If they're just like this, then obviously I'll stick them in the washing machine and they can live another day. But I've used these to clean up little oil spills, little coolant spills, to try and keep my hands vaguely clean when there's loads of plus gas hanging around or stuff like that. And they've just been magic because they're microfiber, it's amazing how much they absorb and how much better they are than something like just like blue towel or some of the standard stuff that you might use. Is it a bit not environmentally friendly because I go through quite a few of these? Probably, but it makes my life a heck of a lot easier in this case. So I thoroughly recommend a set of cheapo kind of microfiber cloths. Don't use your wash towels though, that's like a bad idea. Okay, good, hopefully that was useful. So big impact, ratchet little spinny thing, 2 big adjustables, things to knock things out with, and the bolt extractor set. They've been really helpful when breaking down the Tuscan. And I'll do another one of these series on building up the Tuscan, because I imagine it'll be a different set of tools. Cool, thank you.